Hi everyone, my name's Graham Duplessis. I'm the brand director here at Factory Berlin, and I have the pleasure of welcoming you all to our building this evening for tonight's Fireside Chat. At the core of what we do here is to give every creator an empowering network. So we do have that amazing network of over 5,000 people, and we facilitate that network with wonderful programs, with the beautiful buildings that we have, such as tonight's location, Factory Berlin Görlitzer Park. And we also have wonderful events, which leads me on to welcoming to our stage for tonight's Fireside Chat, Kimberly Emerson, the Board Director for Human Rights Watch, and our moderator for this evening, Suda David Wilp from the German Marshall Fund. Please welcome to the stage.
Our Digital Investigations Lab sits at the heart of our research capacity. It's an extremely important tool for us. It uses remote sensing, it uses open source research, and also quantitative analysis in order to help us go further with our investigations, to get to places where we can't get to normally, and to be able to look for patterns and also deduce lots of data when we see that there's something going wrong, but we can't really put our fingers on what it is. And the lab responds to crises around the world. Obviously, right now we're doing work in Ukraine, but we've also done work in Myanmar and Syria and Ethiopia with the Tigray crisis and other places. So what we do is we integrate open source research and geospatial analysis with our kind of time-tested methodology of going into places, sending our experts into places to do research and to get witness testimonies. And so we supplement this field research. Let's just talk about remote monitoring. So it allows us, and in Ukraine, what we've done is we're constantly receiving and researching videos and photos. But of course, we can't just take something because it's on social media. It has to be authenticated and verified. So of course, we're using, like Google search, image search, where it's kind of a reverse imaging search where it actually goes out and looks for it, the same content, to see if that content's been posted previously, because most disinformation is disattributed content. It's content that's actually already been posted online before. So it's not, so it's Ukraine today, it's not Donbass in 2014. We cross-check different videos against each other, and we also compare them with satellite imagery from our trusted partners who we know are providing us with accurate information. And then we take and we cross-check that against all this eyewitness testimony. We also do something that's extremely time-intensive. It's called geolocation, where we are looking at literally the geography of the land and the features on buildings to make sure that what we're seeing is correct and what angle we're seeing it from. So I'll give you an example of a case study out mid-March. There were 7 days of bombings in Kharkiv in a residential area. So what we did is we basically interviewed refugees who were in Lviv and coming to the border who kept talking about these bombings in their neighborhoods of Kharkiv. And then what we did is we cross-checked thousands of videos with that eyewitness testimony, because what we had from the witnesses was the date, the time, the actual street they were on, and then we cross-checked all of that against authenticated videos. And then we looked at satellite imagery to make sure we were talking about the same places. We also have a forensics expert, actually more than one. We have forensics experts and military experts who work for us, who go in and look at either photos or the geolocation of a bomb or bomb path or bomb fragments to be able to tell us, where the direction the bomb came from and what kind of bomb it was. Was it an indiscriminate bomb? An indiscriminate bomb actually violates the international humanitarian laws, because obviously in war, there are certain things which are tolerated, and one of them is if it's a targeted attack on a military installation. So what we were looking to do is to see, is this military, not military? And what happened is we then took all of this information, the eyewitness testimonies, the satellite images, the videos, et cetera, and we put them into an immersive map of all the places over those 7 days. So if you go online, you can actually find this at our website, and you can look at this map. And in that map, at each of those locations, we provide all of this evidence. And why? Why is it even important? Because it shows a pattern. And a pattern indicates intent. That if it's not a military target, even if it's a targeted bomb, but it's not a military target, that this could have been a war crime. You see, we can't just point out a crime, a bombing here and there where civilians got killed. Everything we do is within a framework of international humanitarian law. And that's what differentiates us from some of the other organizations out there that are collecting videos and posting them, and they're great, and we partner with them, but everything we do has to fit this framework. Because why? This evidence is then handed over to the UN investigative team, or it's handed over to the ICC, or it's handed over to prosecutions going on in places like Germany and the UK. Then I'm going to just give you one more example from Ukraine before we go on, which is a project we're in the process of doing based on what's happened in Mariupol and all the murders on the streets. There were tons of bombings and ground-to-ground combat. People were killed. They were hiding out in basements. They were bombed. And our lab can focus on urban areas and use forensic architecture to show exactly what happened. And so what we did is we got the eyewitness testimony from Mariupol. Then we tasked satellites to actually cover the area so we can have that like evidence with all the destruction. And we are partnered with a company called Planet Labs. I don't know if you know them. They actually have a really big outfit in Berlin, and but they're based out of San Francisco, and they take images 24/7 of the Earth because they have like 200 Dove satellites just constantly circling the Earth taking pictures. Then they have some larger satellites with a little bit better definition that we can ask them to take a look at a particular area. And then along with that, of course, we verified hundreds of videos. Then we partnered with an organization called C2 Research, which actually takes data and merges it with design to create 3D imagery of what the street looked like in Mariupol. So we can show exactly what happened there. And what it does is it will show the scale of destruction, and it will give us evidence that's very convincing for our advocacy targets. And also it creates a public record. And for victims of human rights abuse, that something terrible happened in their lives and that it's publicly acknowledged is a huge step towards repairing their emotional devastation. Doesn't answer everything. They want accountability too, but this helps. So it also helps us counter misinformation that's out there, because in all these cases, Russia's saying, no, it was the Ukrainians. And our evidence actually helps refute that. So I think that, you know, to understand, we use this not only for evidence at the criminal court, but we also use this for advocacy that we're doing right now at the EU, at the UN, in Berlin, in Washington, D.C. Newspapers use this research. And of course, it gets spread in the public so that we can help influence public opinion on the kinds of human rights devastations that are taking place.
I mean, Kimberly, so you've sort of talked about, you know, the positive aspects of technology and how it's empowered or strengthened democracy, and human rights is obviously a key principle when it comes to the, you know, the idea of democracy. But you hinted at it before. There are also authoritarian actors out there that use technology, obviously, to suppress democracy. And when we think about the Arab Spring, almost a decade ago, there was a sense of euphoria about how technology is being used by the people to fight for their rights and to allow for democracy to flourish in places that were perhaps weren't as free. But it seems like the tide is turning now when we think about technology and democracy. You talked about disinformation ops. Tell us a little bit about, how technology is also being used in adverse ways.
So that's the other side of the house, and we do a lot of research and a lot of recommendations. We do a lot of research on the abuse of technology, but we also do we try to get in there early with technology companies to help them think about their policies and platforms through a human rights lens. But it's a big world out there, and it's hard, and this has to be done on a much bigger scale than just like an organization like ours, going from place to place, trying to get people to look at the world in a more sensitive manner through, with thinking about privacy and security concerns. But you're absolutely right. The Arab Awakening, Facebook, and I think a little bit of Twitter, and then Instagram came along later, but they became these incredible organizing tools. And people were able to use them to, gather quickly and, raise their voices against their governments. And we saw it again and again and again in the Arab Awakening, but we also saw it in other parts of the world as well. They became great tools for actually posting evidence of police crackdowns and police abuse. But of course, we're talking about individuals out there. When you suddenly give this technology to governments, and they can use it in a much faster, bigger way. I mean, the Arab Awakening was only 13 years ago, but I would say starting about 6 or 7 years ago, governments started using technology to surveil, to identify, and to track down protesters. And in addition to spread disinformation, which has become, like a huge problem, and incite hatred. And so what we at Human Rights Watch have been arguing about is that platforms haven't responded quickly enough or adequately to these threats. And by not responding quickly enough, they've actually had a hand in influencing human rights abuses. So, and the problem is that there are some companies coming up with policies and taking action, but they're not doing it with a lot of transparency and accountability. And the problem is that the more opaque they are, the more mistakes they're going to make. The other thing that's happening is some of those that are actively removing evidence are missing something, which is when you actively remove it, you can't disappear the evidence. You have to keep it, you have to archive it, you have to preserve it. For organizations like mine, which are doing human rights investigations, for the victims, for journalists, so that the story can get completely told. I mean, when you hark back to the end of World War II, where the Russians were kind of wanting to erase all the memories of the Third Reich, but there were groups that said, no, you have to preserve those because they have to be used for justice in the future. It's the same idea. So, and the other thing is, while you're preserving it, you also have to, protect the privacy rights and the security of the victims. So there's sensitivity on both sides. Keep it, but make sure that you don't publish that information. So I'll give you a great example. In Myanmar in 2017, Facebook responded late and insufficiently to the incitement of hatred that was going on against the Rohingya. And it led to, in part, an ethnic cleansing campaign. In August 2018, the UN published a report that concluded that Myanmar's military had committed war crimes, crimes against humanity, and possibly genocide against the Rohingya. But what they also found in that UN report, what they said was the role of social media in the lead up to the atrocities played a significant role. And in particular, they outed Facebook, and they said they've been a useful instrument for those seeking to spread hate in a context where, for most users, Facebook is the internet. So soon after the report was released, Facebook took down 52 accounts of military, including the head of the military, and, sorry, not 50, 18. And then they also removed 52 pages that were there online associated with the military. But the problem is that it was too little too late. It came years after civil society groups in Myanmar had been warning them, had been pointing out, look at this hatred that is being, raised on the internet here. So that was number one. Number two was that even after they did that, reports of violence and ethnic cleansing continued. And then, if you remember, in February of last year, 2021, there was a military coup. Aung San Suu Kyi was taken out, and the generals put themselves in as the leaders of the country. And it was only after that that Facebook said, they tacitly acknowledged that they probably hadn't done enough. So then they went out and they really scrubbed the military off of Facebook and took down advertising that was owned by military companies. I mean, anything that seemed to be related. They probably went too far because, it was like a sledgehammer approach finally at the end. But that's why social media companies have to go in there early and do the work early to set up sensitive systems that look and create policies that are through a human rights lens.
And do you think they're catching up to these? I mean, like, you're from California. Before the argument is we don't want to stifle innovation, and we want to let these tech companies be able to have the freedom to innovate and not have government regulation get in the way. Do you think that they're realizing that content moderation is important and they have a responsibility now?
Yes, super important. So, I don't think that the internet can ever be a neutral place. I think it's never going to work as a town hall. There has to be, because it's too easily manipulated by folks that are using it. And so if you kind of look at a couple of things, if you look at the UN guiding principles for business and human rights, they require human rights. That guiding principle requires human rights due diligence for every company, including tech companies, which means that they have a responsibility to cease, mitigate, remediate, remove, and account for potential human rights abuses and or even the risk of that. And it's not something that can be done once. I mean, it's the kind of thing that's an ongoing process that you always have to keep returning to. So some of the steps that we advocate that social media companies could take is, first of all, basically stop the chronic underinvestment in countries that are outside North America and Western Europe. And that means they've got to publish their terms of service and their community guidelines in relevant languages wherever they are. They have to invest in responsible moderation practices, both human and automated, and they need to be transparent about how they're spending their resources. I mean, we live in an age where, we're making demands of technology companies that we don't make of most private sector companies, but the fact is that technology companies are powerful enough to be governments. And so, and we've seen the ripple effect and the bad impacts when they don't see themselves as having that kind of responsibility. What they also need to do is they need to align their policies with rigorous human rights standards. They need to carry out rigorous human rights assessments and considerations in their product and policy planning stages, not after the fact. You can't slap it on at the end. And they need to do these ongoing assessments. They also, so there's this other thing too, it's called the Santa Clara Principles. Does anybody here know what the Santa Clara Principles are? If you look them up, it's really interesting. So civil society got together in Santa Clara, which is next to Silicon Valley, and basically thought through and laid out for the tech industry principles on moderation that they should adopt. And these principles require that they put due process, because by the way, if you're removing somebody's content, you better have a due process as to why you're removing it. Because sometimes they're removing activist content. You know, there's human rights abuses on, you've got activists on there, and they're taking their content off the air. So you have to have these considerations that are folded into their moderation practices and integrated at all stages. They have to be understandable, right? I live in Rwanda. What are the practices there? Do they have content moderation? And there has to be cultural competence in that moderation. What does cultural competence mean? It means you have to have moderators who understand the language as locals do, understand the culture, and understand the political and social context in which the posts were put up. You can't have outsiders moderating content in, Nigeria who don't understand what's going on. Because what we have found that happens, and I can think of one country in Africa where this has been an issue, where the leader of the country, who's got power and a megaphone and access, reaches out to a social media company and says, oh, you need to take Google. You need to take that YouTube, this content off of YouTube. It's inciting racism. But Google doesn't have enough moderators there who know. And what this guy is doing, because in this particular country, the leader is known to repress critics of his policies, is he's using Google as a hammer against critics by getting them to remove their content. So that's why content moderation needs to be done very, very locally with very smart people. They need to invest in it. We actually, in an advocacy meeting with Google, said, you guys aren't spending enough money in content moderation. And they took note of that. It was like news to them. They're also, I know, but the problem is who's talking to them? Who's telling them that, right? I mean, activists out there, they have small voices. We have a megaphone. We can tell them. And there has to be integrity and explainability of the moderation system, right? It can't be opaque. You have to be able to back up all of the positions you take. And then, of course, social media platforms have to preserve and archive evidence that could be used as they remove content. And there's also an important need to give access to human rights investigators, journalists, victims, people who have to access that content. You have to make it available. You can't say, I'm sorry, but it's in our archive and we can't get it for you. It's like, no, we're trying to build a body of evidence here. And then I think the big overall question is looking at the underlying business model. Because you're talking about a business model that essentially treats your privacy like a commodity. And so that's one side of it. And the other side of it is, and they get money from selling your data. And the other side of it is that they make money by being divisive, by creating silos, by pushing people into these corners. They get more advertising dollars. And so, and when you have this, like our position is, pervasive surveillance that then ends up with ad companies is fundamentally opposed to human rights, incompatible. And so we actually think ad tech, surveillance-based ad tech should be banned, because I know it's become the business model, but it's, and maybe it'll change with, 3.0 web, but maybe not. They'll find other ways. So long answer, sorry, but I figured of anybody I talk to, this audience will appreciate a deeper conversation on content moderation.
And I don't want to just dwell on the dark side of tech, but one more question on education and access. Is tech also an equalizer, or are we seeing more inequalities emerge in the world? And I'm going to get to your questions very shortly, and I'm sure there are people probably here in the community that work on apps for ed tech. But what are your thoughts on that topic?
So we just came out with a big report on education technology. So during COVID, of course, all around the world, kids went online to learn. And so governments endorsed, promoted, bought ed tech, and 49 countries, had got behind it. And what we discovered is that we looked at 163 applications, 145 of them we found there were violations of children's rights and children's rights to privacy. Why? Okay. Rodan, let's take Rodan, a 9-year-old Turkish kid who is at home doing online learning, jumps on the computer in the morning, checks into his class, then he goes to his homeroom, greets his teacher, then he doodles on the virtual whiteboard, then he attends a math class, and then he checks out of school. He posts his homework on a website. He scans other applications and webs. What he doesn't know, and what his mother doesn't know, is that the minute he checked into school, all these tracking technologies attached to him. And they followed him across the internet all day. And when he turned in his homework on the social media website, he gave access to his contacts through this particular website, and he gave access to every place else that he was on the web. And his virtual whiteboard doodle was analyzed, and AI then took all this information and created a profile of him, which could be used to influence him. I don't think I need to tell you that that's like massive violation. And we found all of this, some of this, with all these applications that were created. So, huge problem. Kind of an explosive report. You can find it under Children's Rights on the Human Rights Watch website, hrw.org. And basically, now governments really need to conduct these data privacy audits across all of this ed tech and remove that technology if, it's because they ultimately have responsibility for making sure children are learning safely. So they have to remove that if it's violating children's rights. And they also have to notify, because we know there's a lot of that out there, notify and guide all the affected parties, the schools, the teachers, the parents, the kids. And of course, it's pretty much ed tech and ad tech should never be collecting data on kids. And they need to delete all the data they have already. That's very, very important. And then they got to go back and work with governments to define clear rules. I mean, it's all about communicating with each other. For-profit, private sector companies cannot just rush off anymore and do what they want. They need to be sensitive to these considerations.
And that's a good segue, communicating with each other for all of your questions. Who would like to start? I only see a sea of purple faces in front of me.
Brandon can see. Anybody?
Raise your hand or just stand up. Anybody? Okay.
If not, then I'd like to have a question. Hello. Kimberly, this is something we discussed.
Can you introduce yourself?
I can introduce myself, but many people are from the community, so they might already know me. My name is Charlotte. I'm our senior program manager here, and so I work closely with our event speakers. We had a lot of really exciting content in this event, and one thing I wish we had time to include was the role of art in creating change. Human Rights Watch, of course, has a film festival, and that's a lot of part of your work, and I'd like to know your perspective on that, Kimberly.
Thanks. We actually have an art and human rights division now. We don't do research on art, but it's because there are so many, when you think about artists, so many of them do their work out of wounds, either societal wounds they see or personal wounds they have. And they come to us. They endorse us. They love us. They really care about human rights in the world, and they really, really, really honor the work that Human Rights Watch does. So we, in turn, partner with them. And there are some very significant artists out there who actually give us art, like literally Sotheby's does an auction every other year, a contemporary auction. And we have artists out there that give us significant works to auction without Sotheby's taking a fee. But also when you think about art, art makes the invisible visible, right? It starts conversations. It's like society looks at a mirror, doesn't always like what it sees, but it makes you think about it and talk about it. And the fact is, I think art can change the zeitgeist, right? I think it's not going to specifically, you can look at some big works over time. What's the big painting Picasso did that's in the museum in Madrid?
Guernica?
Yeah, La Guernica. Guernica is so famous throughout time. Why? Because when you see that, you're there. You're there watching those deaths and that fight. So it's not going to necessarily, but art has also been used to kind of lead revolutions and become kind of an organizing tool. And also leaders see the importance of art. When you think about, I'm going to use Hitler as an example again, but he promoted Grecian and Roman art because it was this kind of racist ideal for him. And he obviously called a lot of other kind of politically challenging art, Dadaism, whatever, degenerate and got rid of it. And so, art is definitely an influencer, no question about it. And I think in the human rights world, we honor artists and we honor art for what it can be.
Thank you. Any more questions?
Okay, there's 2 questions. Why don't we go to this gentleman here and then up there, and we'll swing back. Why don't we take 2 at a time? Go ahead.
I'm Daniel, fashion entrepreneur from Germany and long-term admirer of Kimberly and her work since years and years for your passion for your topic. One question is, in your opinion, in your experience, the situation the last 10 years are worsening or something is moving in the right direction, if you see it globally?
Okay.
If we hear all your messages, we think it's go down the road, nothing becomes better, all the work is for nothing. And second, is there a heat map where you say, beside Ukraine, what is the worst point or the second worst point in the world where we have to look at?
Okay, let's take one more question, and then we'll go back to you, Kimberly.
Okay.
And then we'll come to you after. There was a gentleman back there.
Hello. I wanted to ask a question about the reach of the Human Rights Watch and the changing world systems and the balance of power influencing your strategy in tackling human rights situations in countries that are more closed, authoritarian. What are the new strategies that you're utilizing in those countries because they're harder to reach? Primarily because the global economic power is shifting, and that is influencing these institutions and how they kind of have that influence. Yeah. So I wanted to understand what your new strategies are and what the new challenges are. Yeah.
That's a great question. Okay, so why don't we start with Daniel's question about why does it seem
it was like 3 questions.
Yeah, I've noted down 2. Why does it seem like we're backsliding over the last decade? What can we do to make democracies more resilient? And where should we also pay attention to besides Ukraine?
Yeah. So it's interesting because, President Biden actually gave this speech last week in the United States. I don't know if you guys saw it or saw any of the the comments around it, but he said we're at an inflection point. Now what's interesting is what's happening in the United States, I think is kind of particular to the United States. And it's related to our history, it's related to our two-party system, but where it shares in common with some of the stuff going around the world is how technology has impacted the divisiveness that exists there now. But what he did in that speech, which is really interesting, is he really named names. I mean, I've never seen, he said MAGA Republicans, right, Make America Great Again, Republicans, are essentially wanting to turn the rule of law, get rid of the rule of law. They don't want to go by it. They don't want to follow it. They are essentially spitting in the face of democratic norms. All the things that our country says it was based on, but it's got a bit of a mixed history. But what he said, and also is that, and this is a little bit the scary part, I think, for Americans, is that they want to incite violence, and they want to incite it if they're not in power. And so there is this kind of strange extremist perspective. You say, why did this happen? And I mean, you can see it in copycat candidates that are, basically saying, let's change all the election laws, legal coups where they're trying to gerrymander and change all the districts. You're seeing it in our information ecosystem. And when I was talking about earlier, just like how the internet works and how these social media platforms work, how they put people in silos, and the more extreme your views, the more the silo grabs you, the deeper you go. And so there's no balance of information that people are getting out there. It's very, very hard to get. We've lost our sense of community. We used to talk about, going down to the drugstore, then everybody go to the bowling alley, and then we'd go roller skating, or we'd go sit around and play, a card game in the park. A lot of that is gone now. People are in their phones all the time. And as republics, we think this is my right. I have a right to vote. I have a right to free speech. I have a right to do this. I have a right to do that. Nobody can tell me what to do. And I think a couple of things have happened. Obviously, I come from a human rights organization. We completely believe that everybody has dignity and believe in human rights. But there's another side to this, which is honoring identity. So over the past years, and this is why we have these divisions at Human Rights Watch, we honor identity, right? It's not just about freedom of religion. It's, LGBTQ rights. It's, rights of people with disabilities. All of those rights are really important. But as we all, I'm talking about us, not Human Rights Watch, but as all of us promote those rights and honor those rights, we can't forget that it's not just about our rights, it's about the rights of the other. And we've lost an enormous amount of empathy. We don't teach empathy. You have to model empathy. As a parent, as a colleague, you have to care about the other. And when we lose empathy, we lose our ability to do that. So I think we've lost empathy. We don't socialize with people that are from necessarily as many different backgrounds. I mean, here we are in Berlin. It's a diverse community. But we go into our own little communities online of people that keep repeating back to us these beliefs that we think we want to hear. And so we don't get that diversity of opinions. So it's rough out there, but as a human rights advocate, I wake up every day with hope. And the fact is we do have impact and we do make change. But this is why technology has such a big responsibility.
So you're not going to explain, you're just going to name the geographical area that we should and then we can talk about it more. China. Okay. And then let's go on to his question about the reach and impact of Human Rights Watch in closed spaces, but also maybe in like illiberal democracies,
Yeah.
like Hungary, like India.
Yeah.
How is Human Rights Watch influential in those regions?
So I would say that I'll start with the illiberals. Well, I mean, just to say, in Russia, we had a vibrant office there for 30 years. 30 years of shining a spotlight on the things that Russia wasn't doing right, building relationships with protesters and human rights defenders, local human rights defenders. We work very closely with partners on the ground in every country we work in, because we're not just the saviors from the outside. We believe in doing it. We have to partner with local people, the ones who are really living through it. We have to be extremely sensitive to them. They're often the ones that bring us to the witnesses and the victims of human rights abuse. Moscow closed our office in April and closed about 11 other offices of NGOs. And it was incredibly hard for our staff there, because they had felt for so many years they were making impact. So we're now outside of the country, and we're trying to influence inside the country. So we actually use VPN. People have VPNs in there. So we still create content for them. We try to get the truth in. We know that Telegram is still running. It wasn't our favorite application because it didn't do good content moderation, especially on hate speech. But we've reopened our Telegram account in order to get in. And then we talk a lot to the diaspora, because they're talking to their relatives inside. And then we use remote sensing, to the extent we can. We use technology. So that's just one example. North Korea, obviously, very difficult. But we've placed researchers on the borders to meet with people that were escaping the country. Another quick example, Burma, this is now probably 13 years ago. We actually had a team go in under the auspices of going in as a medical research team. And they then did witness interviews inside the country. We also communicate with dissidents. We're in communication with a lot of dissidents in China. We have different technical methodologies that we use to talk to them. Hard to access. And you're right about the influence of, let's say, the rising global south. We actually saw this 10 years ago. And what we did was we received actually quite a generous amount of funding from a foundation, and we used it to essentially increase our presence in the global south, because we knew that we couldn't say something to Zimbabwe that they would necessarily listen to, but we knew that South Africa could talk to Zimbabwe and pressure them. So we talk to governments where we think we can have an influence over their foreign policy with a target.
I'm going to take one more question, and then we'll call it a night, because you had your hand up too.
I don't really need the microphone, but yeah.
Same here.
So I have like a million questions, because I've been following Human Rights Watch for
Oh,
years.
thank you.
But and I really admire the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Given where we are, I should mention that I'm a captain of the EdTech Circle here at Factory Berlin. And so I will ask a question intrigued by your last mention of how human rights of children are treated or not taken into account in EdTech apps. So the question is related to any EdTech app creators that we have here, because there are many.
Yeah.
Apart from the obvious that you mentioned, which is privacy of individuals and protection of data, what are the 3 key points you feel EdTech apps should pay attention to?
So, of course, privacy, but also security, right? There should never be tracking technology attaching to any of these users, because we found that some kids, like literally, they could follow these kids around after they attached their tracking technology and location technology. Obviously, that's a security thing. There's a privacy thing. Basically, I think the other important thing is ad tech, not having ad tech at all related to, the last thing I think any parent, teacher, school, and even, I think the issue with the ed tech is like a lot of it was created and unintentionally they just do, well, I got to program this in, I always program that in, I program this in. Everything has to be done through a human rights lens. And actually what might be interesting is if I could get one of our advocates. We have a very healthy Berlin office. We probably have at least 20 to 24 people working here. And we actually have an advocate, a wonderful guy who's German, but he also speaks fluent English. And I think he would, maybe if we wanted to gather a group together of you guys working in ed tech so you could talk about this, I think he would be willing to come in and either do it virtually but he lives around the corner from me here in Berlin. So I'd be happy to try to make that happen. Okay. Good.
So the hour went quickly. Thank you so much, Kimberly. It was such an informative and, I must say, inspiring talk. I learned a lot. Thank you all for coming, and we'll continue the conversation in the cinema bar. Yes. And Kimberly, if people want to find out more about Human Rights Watch, besides talking to you in the cinema bar, what else can they do?
My suggestion is you go to our website, hrw.org, because you can sign up to get like our weekly newsletters, which is like a roundup of like human rights tweets, like our top tweets that week. Like if you look now, you'll see everything from the flood in Pakistan and how women are having a particularly difficult time dealing with that. You'll look at this mass collection of DNA evidence in Tibet that we just put out a report on. There's also a report on this amazing UN report on China that just came out that we slammed Michelle Bachelet, who is the head of the UN
She did
Human
it like
Rights.
5 minutes before she resigned.
Exactly. It was her last day.
Yeah.
It came out.
Yeah.
And so those are like just like if you can sign up online for areas, geographic division, topics, or you can just do, hey, send me your top stuff and I want to see what you guys are thinking about and working on right now. And I'm accessible. I mean, you can message me in Instagram at Kimbemo, or just like my name, you can find it. And I said nobody used Facebook anymore, right? So I can say, I know I still have like all these dinosaurs in my life that use Facebook. So
I'm one of them. But anyway, thank you so much for coming.
Or you can tweet at me or something. Anyway,
and enjoy your
Thank
evening.
you very much. Thank you.